Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
After losing her parents, a young woman took a job as a caregiver for a blind businessman, not knowing that he could actually see perfectly and was secretly watching her. And when night fell, Isabel Mendoza woke up that Friday evening to the sound of the phone ringing. Glancing at the clock, she saw it was already 10 o'clock at night. Her parents should have been back from their country house 2 hours ago. The voice on the line was unfamiliar and formal. "Hello, are you the daughter of Miguel and Ana Mendoza?" she heard on the other end. Her heart clenched with a premonition of disaster. "Yes, that's me." "What's happened?" "This is Lieutenant Vargas from the traffic police. I'm very sorry, but your parents were involved in a serious accident on the Central Highway." The rest of the words Isabel seemed to hear through a thick fog. A head-on collision with a truck, death at the scene, the need to come for identification. In 1 second, her orderly life as a medical college student collapsed like a house of cards. The following days passed in a haze: the funeral, bureaucratic formalities, meetings with the notary. Isabel learned the harsh truth: her parents had left her an apartment, but it was mortgaged to the bank, and the insurance payouts covered only part of the debt. The remaining money would last at most 2 months. How could this be? Dad always said our finances were in order, Isabel thought as she sorted through documents in her parents' bedroom. But the harsh reality left no room for illusions. Job hunting turned into a real nightmare. Without a completed medical degree, no one wanted to hire her for a serious position. Private clinics demanded experience, and public hospitals offered miserably low wages for junior nurses. "I'm sorry, but we have no openings for inexperienced candidates," Isabel heard once again at an elite clinic. The administrator didn't even look up from his computer. As she left the building, Isabel felt her knees buckle. Her money was running out, the apartment would be seized in a month, and she had no prospects. She sat down on a bench near the clinic and pulled out her phone to call her only living relative, Uncle Gustavo. Gustavo Ramirez was her father's younger brother, a successful middle-aged businessman. After the funeral, he had promised to help, but Isabel didn't want to be a burden. Now, however, she had no other choice. "Isabelita, dear. How's the job hunt going?" her uncle greeted her cheerfully. "Uncle Gustavo, I've been everywhere. Nobody wants to hire someone without experience." "And the money?" "It's almost gone," Isabel's voice trembled. "Don't worry, sweetheart. I happen to have a proposal. A friend asked me to find a caregiver for his associate. A wealthy man, willing to pay well." Gustavo quickly explained the offer. A certain Alejandro Moreno, the owner of a chain of luxury hotels, had lost his sight a year ago and was looking for a caregiver. The salary was 3 times higher than at any hospital, plus room and board at his mansion. "But, Uncle, I don't have a diploma, I'm still studying." "You have medical training, even if it's unfinished. Most importantly, you're a kind, smart girl. This man isn't looking for degrees, he needs genuine care. If you want, I can arrange a meeting tomorrow." Isabel agreed without hesitation. There was simply no other choice. The next day, Gustavo picked her up in his expensive black car. On the way, he told her about Alejandro Moreno. A 35-year-old widower, he had lost his wife in the same attack where he was blinded. He lived a reclusive life, rarely leaving his home. "Isabelita, remember, this man has survived a terrible tragedy. Be delicate, don't ask unnecessary questions about his past." Moreno's mansion stunned Isabel with its size. A 3-story classical-style building surrounded by manicured gardens and fountains. At the entrance, they were met by an elderly butler. "Senor Moreno is expecting you in the drawing room," he said with a slight accent. In a spacious room with panoramic windows, a man was sitting by the fireplace. Isabel was prepared to meet a blind person, but she hadn't expected to see such a handsome man. Dark hair, well-defined features, and athletic build. Only the dark glasses revealed his affliction. "Senor Moreno, this is Isabel Mendoza," her uncle introduced her. Alejandro stood up and extended his hand directly toward her, as if he could see where she was standing. "Very nice to meet you, Isabel. Please, have a seat." His voice was deep and confident. Isabel sat in the chair opposite and listened carefully as he outlined the job details. Her duties would include helping with daily life, accompanying him on walks, reading business documents and correspondence aloud, and organizing meals. "The salary is $100,000 a month, plus full room and board," Alejandro said, and Isabel almost choked in surprise. She had never seen that kind of money before. "Señor Moreno, I must be honest, I have no experience as a caregiver. Gustavo told me about your situation. I don't need a professional nurse, I need someone I can trust. You have the education, you'll learn the rest." Alejandro showed Isabel the room that would be hers, a spacious bedroom with a private bathroom and large windows overlooking the garden. Compared to her cramped childhood apartment, it seemed like a palace. "Shall we give it a try? If it doesn't work out, we'll part ways without hard feelings," he offered, extending his hand for a handshake. "I agree," Isabel replied, shaking his firm hand. Saying goodbye at the door, Gustavo hugged his niece tightly. "You'll do great, Isabelita. You'll be fine here. Call me every day and tell me how it's going." That evening, settling into her new room, Isabel thought about how drastically her life had changed. Just a week ago, she had been an ordinary student, and now she was the caregiver for a millionaire. Sometimes fate has the strangest twists. Isabel's first morning in Alejandro Moreno's house began at 6:30. She had struggled to fall asleep in the unfamiliar surroundings, listening to every sound in the big house. At 6:30, there was a gentle knock on her door. "Señorita Mendoza, Señor Moreno asked me to inform you that breakfast will be served at 8 o'clock in the small dining room," the butler, Esteban, said. The elderly man had worked in the house for many years and knew all of his employer's habits. Isabel quickly got ready and went downstairs. The small dining room was a cozy room with large windows overlooking the garden. Alejandro was already seated at the table, a cup of coffee and a stack of documents in front of him. "Good morning, Isabel. I hope you slept well," he said, raising his head as she entered. "Yes, thank you. The room is very comfortable," she replied, sitting down opposite him. Breakfast was served in a European style: oatmeal, scrambled eggs, toast, jam, and fresh fruit. Alejandro ate neatly, but Isabel noticed he didn't fumble for the utensils. He reached for them directly. "Tell me about your usual day," Isabel asked. "I get up at 7, breakfast, then I usually work with documents. I'll need you to read them aloud. Then a walk in the garden, lunch, in the afternoon I take calls from my hotel managers. Dinner at 8, and in the evening I usually listen to music or audiobooks." Isabel nodded, mentally outlining the day's schedule. After breakfast, Alejandro led her to the study, a spacious room with a massive oak desk, leather chairs, and bookshelves. "This is where I spend most of my time," he said, walking confidently to the desk. Isabel noticed he didn't use a cane and moved around with confidence. On the desk were documents, reports, and business letters. Alejandro asked her to start with the morning mail. Isabel read the letters aloud while he listened carefully, occasionally commenting or dictating responses. A letter from the manager of the London hotel. "Revenue last month rose by 15%, Isabel read. "Excellent. Send him my congratulations and ask for a detailed report on new initiatives," Alejandro responded. After 2 hours of working with documents, they went out to the garden. The grounds were impeccably maintained: manicured lawns, flower beds, a central fountain, and stone pathways. "I love the smell of roses in the morning," Alejandro said, stopping by the rose bushes. After losing his sight, all his other senses sharpened. They walked slowly along the path as Isabel described the surrounding landscape. Alejandro listened attentively, occasionally asking for details. Isabel noticed that he never stumbled or bumped into branches, as if he knew exactly where everything was. When they returned to the house, they had lunch in the same small dining room. Gradually, their conversation turned to more personal topics. Alejandro, how long have you been living in this house? Isabel asked. 10 years now. I bought it when I was just starting to build my hotel business. Back then it was just a big house, but now, he waved his hand. Do you have family? Alejandro's face darkened. I did. A year ago, in the same attack, I lost not only my sight but also my wife. Carolina, she was a wonderful woman. Isabel sensed she had touched on a painful subject. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Don't apologize. It's just a painful topic. But that's exactly why you're here. I need not just professional help, but human companionship too. In the afternoon, calls started coming in. Alejandro spoke with the managers of his hotels, discussing business matters and making decisions. Isabel took notes under his dictation. Around 5 o'clock, Isabel's phone rang. It was her Uncle Gustavo. Isabelita, how's everything? How do you like the new job? Everything's fine, Uncle. Alejandro is very polite. The work isn't hard. And him? Is he happy with you? I think so. At least he hasn't complained. Alejandro was sitting in a chair nearby, and Isabel noticed he was listening closely to her conversation. Isabelita, tell me more about his daily routine. What time does he wake up? What does he do? Her uncle continued to question. Isabel was a bit surprised by his interest but gave a general description of Alejandro's day. After the call, she noticed Alejandro frowning thoughtfully. Dinner passed in a pleasant atmosphere. Alejandro talked about his travels before losing his sight, about the different countries where he had hotels. Isabel listened attentively, occasionally asking questions. Do you like music? Alejandro asked. Very much. Especially classical. Perfect. After dinner, I usually listen to vinyl in the living room. Would you join me? They went to the living room, where there was an expensive audio system and a collection of records. Alejandro put on Chopin, and they sat by the fireplace, listening to the music. You know, Isabel, I haven't felt this peaceful in a long time, Alejandro said during a pause between pieces. Why? After my wife's death, I became very distrustful of people. The attack was carried out by those I considered close. But with you here, I feel safe. Isabel didn't know what to say. There was something very personal, almost intimate, in his words. Before bed, she called Uncle Gustavo, as he had asked. Uncle, everything went well. Alejandro is very tactful. You're doing great, Isabelita. And him? Does he trust you? Does he talk about his business? We're still getting to know each other. But yes, he shares work details with me. Good, good. Call me every day, I worry about you. Lying in bed, Isabel thought about her uncle's strange interest in the details of her work. But she quickly brushed the thoughts aside. He probably just cared for her as his only relative. The next day, she began to see other sides of life in the house. In the morning, a masseur came for Alejandro, and in the afternoon, a personal trainer. Isabel was surprised to find a gym in the basement, treadmills, exercise machines, even a small pool. Physical fitness is very important when you can't see, Alejandro explained. You need to compensate for the loss of one sense by developing the others. During the workout, Isabel watched Alejandro. He trained with astonishing confidence, as if he could see every piece of equipment. The trainer only slightly corrected his movements. On the third day, a luxury car pulled up to the house. A young man of about 30, dressed in an expensive suit, got out. Diego has arrived, Esteban said. My nephew, Alejandro explained to Isabel. The only family I have left. Diego entered the living room with a wide smile. Uncle Alejandro, how are you? I see you have a new caregiver. Isabel, meet Diego. Diego, this is Isabel Mendoza. Diego shook her hand, giving her a thorough once-over. Nice to meet you. I hope my uncle isn't being too difficult. Not at all, Diego. Alejandro is very polite, Isabel replied. How are things at the Capital Branch? Alejandro asked. Everything's going according to plan. Though you know, Uncle, some decisions need to be made faster. The competition isn't sleeping. Isabel noticed a certain tension in the conversation. Diego spoke to his uncle quite freely, even a bit familiarly. By the way, Uncle, it's time to think about delegating some authority. You can't oversee everything personally. Alejandro tensed. As long as I'm of sound mind and memory, I will manage everything myself. After Diego left, Alejandro was silent for a long time. Isabel saw that the visit had upset him. Not a very pleasant young man, she cautiously remarked. Diego is my brother's son. After his parents died, I raised him as my own. But now... Alejandro didn't finish the sentence. That evening, as they listened to music, Isabel dared to ask. Alejandro, who organized the attack? Did the police find the culprits? Alejandro's face turned to stone. Officially, yes. They caught 2 hired hitmen. But who hired them? The investigation hit a dead end. But do you have any suspicions? A successful businessman always has many enemies, Isabel. But most often, the blow comes from those you least expect. Those words echoed in Isabel's mind all evening. During her call with her uncle, she mentioned Diego's visit. Ah, the nephew, Gustavo drawled. What did he say? What did you talk about? Mostly business. Alejandro seemed upset after he left. Isabelita, listen carefully to what they discuss. It could be important to understand how their family works. Once again, Isabel was puzzled by her uncle's interest but decided not to dwell on it. Late that evening, passing by Alejandro's study, she overheard him talking on the phone. His voice was tense, almost angry. I said no changes to the company charter. And don't call me again with such proposals. I wonder who he's talking to like that. Isabel thought as she walked past, but the question lingered in her mind. Clearly, something was happening in the house that she didn't yet understand. A week had passed since Isabel had moved into Alejandro Moreno's house, and the more time she spent with him, the more oddities she noticed in his behavior. For a blind man, he moved through the house with astonishing confidence. One morning, while reading his mail to him in the study, Isabel accidentally dropped a pen on the floor. She bent down to pick it up, but Alejandro quickly reached out and handed her the pen, as if he had seen where it fell. Thank you, Isabel mumbled, looking at him in confusion. My hearing has become very sharp since losing my sight, Alejandro explained, but there was a note of uncertainty in his voice. But it wasn't just his hearing. When they walked in the garden, Alejandro would unerringly turn his head toward flying birds, following their movement. Once, he even pointed. Look, what a beautiful butterfly has landed on the rose. Isabel followed his gaze and indeed saw a bright yellow butterfly. How could you tell? From the air movement, the smell, he answered quickly. Even stranger was Alejandro's behavior during lunch when Isabel decided to change clothes after their walk. She went into the living room, thinking he was still in the study, and started taking off her soiled blouse. Suddenly she heard, Isabel, maybe it would be better if you changed in your room? She spun around. Alejandro was standing by the window, his back to her. But somehow, he knew exactly what she was doing. I thought you weren't here, she stammered, quickly pulling her blouse back on. I heard you come in and figured it out by the sound, he said, again, not a very convincing explanation. But the strangest incident happened a few days later. Isabel brought him tea to his study and saw several photographs spread out on the table, pictures of buildings, documents, plans. Alejandro, are you looking at photographs? She asked, unable to contain her curiosity. Alejandro turned sharply, and for a moment Isabel felt like he was looking right at her. These are materials for a new project. Esteban describes the images to me. But Esteban wasn't there, and the photographs were laid out as if someone had been examining them closely. Isabel began to observe more carefully. During phone calls, Alejandro sometimes made notes, moving his pen across the paper. When she later looked at the sheets, the notes weren't random scribbles, they were perfectly legible. "How do you write so neatly?" she asked one day. "I practiced a lot. After losing my sight, I had to relearn many things," he answered, but Isabel noticed how the muscles in his face tensed. She observed his most suspicious behavior when unfamiliar cars approached the house. Alejandro somehow always seemed to know about them instantly, even though his study's windows faced the opposite direction and the sound of an engine was barely audible. "Someone's coming," he would say, rising from his desk. "How do you know?" "I heard the car. Every engine has its own sound." But one time, Isabel listened carefully, there was no sound of a car. Yet 5 minutes later, a vehicle did arrive with a courier. Even stranger was how Alejandro reacted to people. When business partners visited him, he seemed to read their gestures and facial expressions. During one meeting, a guest discreetly twirled his finger near his temple as Alejandro spoke. Alejandro abruptly cut his speech short and said coldly, "Señor Perez, if my proposals seem foolish to you, you are free to leave my house." The guest paled. I didn't say anything." "Your face said more than words." "How could a blind man see facial expressions?" Isabel decided to run her own experiment. During dinner, she discreetly removed one of her shoes and placed it in the middle of the walkway between the table and the door. Alejandro got up to retrieve something from the sideboard, walked across the room, and neatly avoided the shoe without breaking stride. "Alejandro, how did you know there was a shoe on the floor?" she asked bluntly. He froze, and in the ensuing silence, the only sound was the ticking of the clock on the mantelpiece. "By the smell of leather," he finally said. "And by the way the sound of my footsteps changed." The explanation was unconvincing, but Isabel didn't press. Still, a wild thought circled in her mind: what if Alejandro wasn't blind at all? These suspicions deepened after a conversation with Uncle Gustavo. During their next call, he again asked detailed questions about Alejandro's habits, his daily routine, and what he talked about. "Uncle, why do you need to know so much about Alejandro's life?" Isabel finally asked. Isabelita, I'm just worried about you. I want to make sure you're safe and being treated well." But there was something in her uncle's voice that made her uneasy. After the call, Isabel noticed Alejandro sitting quietly in a chair nearby, listening carefully again. "Your uncle is a very caring man," he remarked. "Yes, he's the only family I have left." "And he knows my family well?" "I don't know." "Why do you ask?" Alejandro paused. "Just curious." "You know, Isabel, lately I've noticed that people are taking an unusual interest in me, and not always with good intentions," he said, and there was a hidden threat in his tone that made Isabel shiver. On Saturday, Alejandro's nephew Diego visited again. This time, he brought some documents and insisted on their immediate signing. "Uncle, it's just a formality." "You trust me, don't you?" "Diego, I've already said, no changes to the company's management. But think about it, it's hard for you to control everything yourself. Why not delegate at least some authority?" "No." Isabel noticed that as Alejandro listened to Diego, his hands clenched into fists, and when Diego reached for a pen on the table to push the documents forward, Alejandro's gaze followed his movements. After Diego left, Alejandro was visibly upset. "Isabel, tell me honestly, what do you think of my nephew?" "Honestly? I think he's in a hurry to get control of your business. That's what worries me." Late that evening, Isabel decided to act. After dinner, she noticed Alejandro had forgotten to turn off the desk lamp in his study. Quietly approaching the door, she peeked inside. Alejandro was sitting at the desk under the lamp, looking intently at the photographs laid out before him, without his dark glasses. Isabel backed away from the door, her heart hammering. Alejandro wasn't blind. He could see perfectly. But why pretend? And more importantly, did he know that she had discovered the truth? As if in response to her thoughts, Alejandro raised his head and looked directly at the door. In the dim hallway, Isabel wasn't sure if he could see her, but she quietly retreated to her room. She couldn't sleep all night, turning over what she had seen. Alejandro Moreno, the man she thought helpless, could see. But why the deception? And was she in danger now that she knew? At breakfast the next morning, Alejandro was as usual in his dark glasses, carefully handling his fork and knife. But Isabel watched him differently now, marveling at how skillfully he played the part of a blind man. "Isabel, you seem thoughtful today," he noted. "I didn't sleep well," she replied cautiously. "Why? Is something bothering you?" There was a warning in his voice. He knew that she knew, and now a veil of unspoken tension and mutual suspicion hung between them. "Nothing special. I'm just still adjusting to the new place." "I understand. You know, Isabel, trust is very important. Especially between people living under the same roof." "Yes, I agree. And sometimes what seems like deception is actually a way of protection." Isabel understood. This was almost a confession. Alejandro was letting her know he was aware she had uncovered his secret but wasn't ready to discuss it openly yet. That day she noticed he watched her more closely. When Uncle Gustavo called in the evening, Alejandro didn't even pretend not to listen. "Uncle, everything's fine," Isabel said carefully, feeling Alejandro's heavy gaze on her. "Isabelita, how's Alejandro's health? Is his vision getting worse? Is he considering surgery?" Those questions struck Isabel as very odd. Why would her uncle want such specific details about Alejandro's eyesight? "No, Uncle, he hasn't mentioned any surgery." "I see. And what are his plans? Is he thinking about traveling anywhere?" After the call, Isabel noticed Alejandro gripping the armrests of his chair so hard his knuckles turned white. "Your uncle shows remarkable concern for my health," he said after a pause. "He's just worried about how I'm managing the job. Maybe. Or maybe he's interested in something else." Isabel felt she was caught in a game whose rules she didn't understand. Alejandro was hiding something, her uncle's behavior was suspicious, and Diego was pushing hard to take over the business. And in the center of it all was her, a girl who had just been looking for a job after her parents' death. That night she barely slept again, questions swirling in her mind. What if Alejandro wasn't just pretending to be blind but was preparing a complex operation against his enemies? What if Uncle Gustavo hadn't placed her here by chance? And worst of all, what if Alejandro decided she knew too much? The answers to these questions would come very soon. Isabel felt her calm job as a caregiver was nearing its end. The decisive moment came 2 weeks after Isabel first suspected Alejandro was faking. That night would be etched in her memory as the turning point in their relationship and in the entire strange story. Isabel woke around 2 in the morning, thirsty. Quietly getting out of bed, she headed to the kitchen for water. The mansion was steeped in nighttime silence, the only sound the slight creaking of old floorboards beneath the carpet. As she passed Alejandro's study, she noticed a light under the door. At first, she intended to walk past, but something stopped her, perhaps professional concern for her patient, or simple human curiosity. Isabel cautiously approached and peeked through the crack between the door and frame. What she saw exceeded all her expectations. Alejandro sat at his desk without his dark glasses, leaning over documents. From time to time, he wrote in a notebook, his hand confidently tracing lines of text. But the most astonishing thing was his eyes, completely healthy, clear, and focused. Alejandro was reading documents exactly like a sighted person. There was no sign of blindness whatsoever. Isabel held her breath, glued to the door. One of the photographs Alejandro was examining looked familiar. It was a picture of her Uncle Gustavo. Nearby lay several other photographs of unfamiliar people, as well as plans for some buildings. Her heart pounded wildly. Alejandro raised his head and rubbed his forehead, then picked up another photograph. It was a picture of Diego, his nephew. The way Alejandro looked at the photo made Isabel's skin crawl. His eyes were filled with cold fury. Suddenly, Alejandro turned sharply toward the door. Isabel barely managed to step aside, pressing against the hallway wall. Her heart was pounding so loudly she thought he must hear it. "Who's there?" Alejandro asked in a calm voice. Isabel froze. A few seconds of silence felt like an eternity. Then she heard the sound of a chair being pushed back and footsteps across the study. There was nowhere to run. If Alejandro opened the door, he would surely see her. "Isabel, I know it's you," Alejandro said as he approached the door. "Come in." She had no choice. Slowly, like someone walking to the gallows, Isabel entered the study. Alejandro stood by the desk, without his glasses, his clear brown eyes looking straight at her. In that gaze, she saw everything: disappointment, weariness, and a strange, resolute determination. "Sit down," he said, pointing to the chair in front of the desk. Isabel sat down, not knowing what to say. The photographs and documents still lay scattered across the table. She could see building plans, some diagrams, and handwritten notes. "I suppose you have questions," Alejandro said, sitting down across from her. Without the dark glasses, he looked completely different, younger, but at the same time more dangerous. You're not blind," Isabel whispered. "No, I'm not blind." "But why? Why the deception?" Alejandro stood and walked over to the window. Even in the dark, he moved with absolute confidence. Now it was clear why. A year ago, there was an attempt on my life. An explosion in my car. My wife Carolina died instantly. I was miraculously saved, but seriously injured. I spent a month in a coma in the hospital. He turned to Isabel, and in the moonlight streaming from the window, his face looked haggard. "When I woke up, the doctor said my condition was critical. Officially, I lost my sight. Unofficially, I decided to use it." "Use it?" "You see, Isabel, the attempt wasn't by random gangsters. It was a very professional job. Someone from my close circle leaked information about my route, about the timing of my trip. Someone I trusted." Alejandro returned to the table and picked up one of the photographs. "I decided to remain blind to observe those around me. People behave very differently around a helpless invalid. They relax, say things they would never say to someone healthy. And what have you found out?" "A lot. For example, that my nephew Diego has been secretly taking loans against his share of the company. That he's been meeting with people of very questionable reputation." Isabel felt the hair on the back of her neck stand up. "You suspect Diego of organizing the attack?" "Suspect? I'm almost certain. After my death, he would become the sole heir to the company. But as long as I'm alive, even as a blind man, he has to rely on me voluntarily handing over control." Alejandro put the photo back on the table and picked up another one, a photo of Isabel's uncle, Gustavo. Isabel felt a chill run through her. "What do you mean?" "Gustavo Ramirez is a very business-minded man. He's in real estate, has connections in construction. And he's quite familiar with Diego." "That can't be." "It can, Isabel. In fact, they're involved in several projects together, very lucrative ones." Alejandro stepped behind the desk and turned on the computer. Documents, photos, and diagrams appeared on the screen. "3 months ago, your uncle acquired a plot of land next to one of my hotels. A very advantageously located property. And a week ago, Diego suggested I sell that hotel, claiming it was unprofitable." Isabel felt the ground slipping from under her feet. "But what do I have to do with this?" "I didn't know anything." "Of course you didn't. You were just a pawn in their game. They used you as a source of information. Remember how carefully your uncle questioned you about my daily routine, my health?" Isabel recalled all those phone conversations where Uncle Gustavo had asked detailed questions about Alejandro's life. It had seemed like concern for her, but now. "They're planning a second attempt," Alejandro said calmly, as if talking about the weather. "What? This time they want to make sure they succeed. Diego has already hinted twice that it's time for me to make a will. And your uncle, through you, is finding out when I have the least security, when I'm home alone. Isabel felt nauseous. Alejandro, I swear, I didn't know anything. I thought my uncle just cared about me. I believe you, Isabel. That's why I decided to tell you the truth. Yesterday, I intercepted a conversation between Diego and your uncle. They set a date. What date? The date of my death. The day after tomorrow, Friday. Diego will come with new documents, and according to their plan, you're supposed to slip a sedative into my tea. Isabel shot up from her chair. But I haven't done anything like that. And I won't. I know. But they plan to bring the sedative with them and will ask you to give it to me. They'll say it's to help me relax before making an important decision. Alejandro walked to the safe, opened it, and took out a pistol. Isabel instinctively recoiled. The day after tomorrow, they will come here intending to kill me. And if their plan succeeds, you might be the next victim. Me? But why? Because you would be the only witness. Officially, I would be killed by unknown intruders. And you, unfortunately, would die trying to protect your employer. Isabel sank back into the chair, her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. Everything felt like a nightmare. What should I do? She whispered. Alejandro put the gun away and sat down beside her. For the first time since they'd met, there was a warmth in his voice. Help me catch them. We have 2 days to prepare. I've already contacted the police, but I need evidence and your help. Isabel, look at me. She raised her eyes. Alejandro was looking at her seriously and intently. Your uncle has already betrayed you. He used your trust and grief after your parents' death. He put you in danger without caring about the consequences. And you know what? What? I suspect that your parents' deaths weren't an accident either. Isabel felt her world collapsing around her. What are you saying? Alejandro pulled another document from the desk. Your parents owned a plot of land, the same one your uncle now owns. Shortly before their death, they refused to sell it, despite a very lucrative offer. Tears welled up in Isabel's eyes. Everything she believed in, everything she relied on, turned out to be a lie. I'll help you, she said quietly. Tell me what to do. Alejandro took her hand. Thank you, Isabel. I promise, once this is over, we'll find the truth about your parents' deaths, and you'll have real justice. The rest of the night they spent planning the operation to trap the killers. Isabel learned that the house had a hidden surveillance system, that Alejandro was already in touch with the police, and that he had been preparing for this moment for a long time. Why do you trust me? She asked toward morning. Because over this time, I've gotten to know you, Isabel. I've seen that you're honest and sincere. And because we have no other choice. When dawn came, Alejandro put on his dark glasses again and resumed his role as a blind man. But now there was a secret between them, binding them more firmly than any formal agreement. Remember, Isabel, behave as usual. Not a word, not a gesture must betray that you know the truth. I understand. Now go rest. Tomorrow will be a tough day. Lying in her bed, Isabel thought about how much her life had changed overnight. Yesterday she had been just a caregiver. Today, she was part of a covert operation to catch killers. And perhaps a witness to the truth about her own parents' deaths. It was terrifying to even think that the person she considered her only close relative might have been involved in her parents' deaths. But even scarier was the knowledge that tomorrow would decide both her fate and Alejandro's. The next day, Isabel could hardly maintain the usual routine, knowing what she now knew. At breakfast, Alejandro was, as always, in his dark glasses, cautiously handling his cutlery. But there was now an invisible connection between them, a secret understanding. Diego will be coming today, Alejandro announced casually. He called early this morning, said he has urgent documents for signing. Isabel nodded, trying not to show her nervousness. What time will he be here? After lunch. By the way, Isabel, I have a headache. Could you make me some herbal tea? The recipe's in the kitchen cabinet. She understood this was a rehearsal. Tomorrow they would ask her to give Alejandro a sedative, but today they had to practice the situation. Diego arrived at 3 in the afternoon. He looked nervous, constantly glancing at his watch and fidgeting with the folder of documents. Isabel served the tea and sat in the corner of the living room with a book, as usual. Uncle, I brought the new version of the power transfer agreement, Diego began. The lawyers have polished all the details. Diego, I already told you, I'm not ready to transfer anything yet, Alejandro replied calmly. But uncle, think about it, managing a business remotely is very hard. And with your health condition. My health is just fine. Isabel noticed a flicker of anger, almost hatred, flash across Diego's face. He quickly composed himself. Fine, fine. But at least take a look at the documents. Maybe you'll change your mind? As Isabel had expected, Diego asked her to read the documents aloud. As she read, she grasped the gist. The nephew wanted signing authority over all company accounts, access to bank deposits, and control over the real estate assets. Very interesting terms, Alejandro noted after the reading. And what if I refuse? Uncle, you know, the business can't stand still if you're not ready to adapt to new realities. Diego didn't finish his sentence, but the threat hung in the air. After he left, Alejandro remained silent for a long time. Did you see his face when he thought I wasn't looking? Alejandro finally asked. Yes. He hates you. Hatred is a strong emotion. But greed is even stronger. He's ready to do anything for money. That evening, Uncle Gustavo called. The phone was on speaker, and Alejandro listened in. Isabelita, how are you? Everything good? Yes, Uncle. Everything's fine. And Alejandro? Is he sick? No, his health is pretty good. And his mood? He's not depressed, is he? Isabel was surprised by the question. No, Uncle. Why do you ask? Oh, just worried. You know, tomorrow I'd like to visit you both. It's been a long time since I've seen Alejandro. I want to check in on him personally. Isabel caught her breath. Tomorrow? Yes, tomorrow evening. I should be there around 7. And Isabelita, I have a special medicine for Alejandro from a doctor friend of mine. They say it works wonders for his condition. You'll give it to him as prescribed, won't you? Me? I don't know, Uncle. I'd need to ask Alejandro. Isabelita, it's for his own good. Don't tell him in advance, he'll refuse. You know how sick people are about treatment. After the call, Isabel looked at Alejandro. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. So they'll come together tomorrow, he said quietly. Diego and your uncle. And they'll bring the medicine with them. What should we do? What we planned. The police will be ready. You'll have to agree to give me the medicine, but swap it for regular water. And if they check? They won't have time. As soon as I pass out, they'll show their true faces. Alejandro walked over to the window and stared out into the darkening garden for a long time. Isabel, there's something else I need to tell you about your parents. Her heart clenched. What is it? Today, I received the results of the accident investigation. The brake system of the car had been tampered with. It wasn't an accident. Isabel's legs felt weak. They were killed? Yes. And I know why. A month before their deaths, your parents received an offer to sell their land from a company owned by your uncle. They refused. But why was he so desperate for that land? Alejandro returned to the table and pointed at a map. See this plot? It's in a promising area. In 2 years, major construction will begin, a new shopping complex. Your uncle knew about it in advance. But your parents refused to sell the land where they had spent their childhood. Tears streamed down Isabel's cheeks. So he killed them for money? Most likely. And he kept you alive because, by law, you inherited the land. He thought he could persuade you to sell. But then he came up with a better plan. What plan? To use you against me. Kill me and take control of my company together with Diego. And your parents' land would be a bonus. Alejandro sat beside Isabel and took her hand. I promise you, tomorrow it ends. And what will happen to me after all this? After all this, you'll be free and rich. Your parents' land is worth a fortune now. Plus compensation for the harm done. I don't want money. I want the truth. And you'll have it. The night passed almost without sleep. Isabel imagined the next day over and over again. What if something goes wrong? What if Diego and Uncle realize it's a trap? What if they bring real poison instead of a sedative? At breakfast the next morning, Alejandro was calm as ever. Today is the decisive day, Isabel. Remember, act natural. They must not suspect anything. And the police? They're ready. As soon as I give the signal, they'll come in. What signal? I'll drop the glass with the medicine. That'll mean we have enough evidence. The day dragged on unbearably slowly. Isabel reread the same page of her book without understanding a word. Alejandro was working in his study, but she could see he was nervous too. At 6:30, a car pulled up to the house. Diego and Gustavo got out. They exchanged a few quiet words near the car before heading to the house. Isabel, dear, Uncle said cheerfully, hugging her. She forced herself to smile. The man hugging her was her parents' murderer. Alejandro, how are you? How's your health? Uncle shook Alejandro's hand. Thank you, Gustavo. Everything's fine. I brought you something interesting, Uncle said, pulling a small bottle out of his bag. A new medicine from Swiss doctors. They say it works wonders for vision problems. Isabel noticed the look Uncle and Diego exchanged, a look of complete understanding. It's very expensive, Uncle continued, but for you, nothing is too good. Right, Isabelita? Yes, Uncle. Good. Isabel will prepare it for you, and you'll feel much better after taking it. Meanwhile, Diego laid some documents on the table. Uncle, while the tea is being prepared, we can calmly discuss everything without any unnecessary emotions. Alejandro nodded. All right. Isabel, please prepare it. Isabel took the bottle. The liquid inside was clear, odorless. She went to the kitchen, her hands shaking, poured water into a glass, and pretended to add the contents of the bottle. When she returned, the conspirators were deep in discussion. They fell silent when they saw her. Here's your medicine, Alejandro, Isabel said, handing him the glass. Alejandro took the glass and brought it to his lips. At that moment, Diego and Gustavo watched his every move closely. To health, Alejandro said, and took a sip. No one spoke. They waited. Minutes stretched like hours. Alejandro took a second sip, then a third. Gustavo and Diego didn't take their eyes off him, waiting for the medicine to take effect. Isabel sat in the corner, trying to look concerned. Perhaps it's time to get down to business, Diego said, unfolding the documents. Uncle, you understand this is the best way forward for everyone. Alejandro pretended to sway slightly. I'm feeling strange. Dizzy. That's normal, Gustavo quickly said. The medicine is kicking in. Just relax. Isabel saw how their faces lit up. Diego pulled out a pen, and Gustavo pushed the documents closer. You should lie down on the sofa, Alejandro, Isabel suggested, playing her role. Yes, lie down, Uncle. Rest a bit, Diego chimed in. Alejandro stood up, swayed, and walked to the sofa. He settled there, half lying down with his eyes closed. Perfect, Gustavo whispered to Diego. In 5 minutes, he'll sign anything. And most importantly, he won't remember a thing, Diego answered quietly. Isabel realized with horror, whatever was in that bottle wasn't just a sedative, it was something far more dangerous. Possibly a delayed action poison. Isabelita, come here, Uncle called. I want to talk to you. She approached, and he put his arm around her shoulders. To an outsider, it would look like a gesture of family affection. You did well, he whispered in her ear. But after today, you'd better leave. Far away, for a long time. What do you mean, Uncle? Alejandro is very sick. I'm afraid his condition will only get worse. And witnesses to his illness? He gave her a significant look. Now Isabel understood, they planned to kill her too, right after Alejandro. Meanwhile, Diego approached the sofa. Uncle, how are you? Feeling better? Alejandro mumbled something unintelligible, as if in a daze. Perfect. Now we can get the documents signed. And the will too. The will? Isabel asked. Of course, Gustavo smirked. Alejandro's been meaning to draft one for a long time. Very responsible of him. Diego lifted Alejandro's head and shoved a pen into his hand. Come on, Uncle, sign here. These are important documents. Alejandro feebly moved the pen across the paper, pretending to try to sign. At the same time, Isabel noticed him making marks on a napkin nearby. Something's not working, Alejandro mumbled. I feel really bad. Don't worry, Uncle. You'll feel much better soon, Diego said menacingly. Gustavo went over to the window and peered outside. Diego, we need to hurry. The neighbors might notice our car. Yeah. Alejandro, try to focus. These are the last documents you'll ever have to sign, Diego's voice had taken on a threatening tone. The mask of the caring nephew had completely slipped. Alejandro made a few more movements with the pen, then his hand fell limply. All done, Diego said, grabbing the documents. He signed everything we needed. And now what about him? Gustavo asked. Exactly as we planned. A heart attack from an overdose of medicine. By morning, it'll all be over. Isabel realized the moment of truth had come. But Alejandro lay still, not giving the agreed signal. And the girl? Gustavo nodded toward Isabel. The girl saw her uncle suddenly get worse. She tried to help him, but unfortunately, she couldn't save him. The stress and grief led to a nervous breakdown. She'll need long-term treatment in a psychiatric hospital. Uncle Gustavo, Isabel said quietly, was it you who killed my parents? Gustavo turned to her. His face showed none of its usual kindness. Your parents were stubborn fools, Isabelita. I offered them a fair deal, but they refused. Because of some stupid sentimentality. Over money. You killed them for money. I killed them because they stood in the way. Just like him, he nodded toward Alejandro. But don't worry. You'll be reunited with your parents soon. Diego pulled a syringe from his pocket. One more dose, just to be sure. He moved toward Alejandro, but at that moment, Alejandro's eyes snapped open. He sat up and, in one motion, knocked the glass to the floor. It shattered with a loud crash. What the hell? Diego exclaimed. Alejandro ripped off his dark glasses. Game over, gentlemen. Gustavo and Diego stood frozen in shock. In front of them sat a perfectly healthy man, eyes clear and sharp. You're supposed to be blind, Diego whispered. If I were blind, you'd have killed me long ago. I heard every word you said and saw every gesture you made. The police burst into the house. Several officers in bulletproof vests quickly secured the exits. Hands up. Nobody move, came the command. Diego tried to pull a gun, but an officer was faster. Within seconds, Diego was on the floor in handcuffs. Gustavo bolted for the door, but Alejandro blocked his path. You're not going anywhere, murderer. This is for Carolina, for Isabel's parents. For everything. Gustavo stopped in the middle of the room. It was a trap. All of it was a trap. From the start. Isabel knew the truth yesterday, he said, glaring at her with hatred. Traitor. I cared about you. You killed my parents, Isabel found the strength to shout. And you tried to kill Alejandro. We have recordings of everything, the senior officer announced. Confessions, threats, attempted poisoning. More than enough. Gustavo and Diego were led away in handcuffs. Before leaving, Gustavo shot Isabel a look full of pure malice. You'll regret this. I'll find a way. The only thing you'll find is a prison cell for many years, Alejandro said coldly. When the police had gone with the prisoners, the house fell silent. Isabel and Alejandro were alone. It's over, he said quietly. Suddenly, Isabel burst into tears. All the emotion she had bottled up spilled out. Alejandro held her as she cried on his shoulder, tears of relief, grief for her parents, shock. I know it's hard, but it's over now. Your parents have justice, and you have your freedom. What happens now? She asked through her tears. Now, a new life begins for both of us. Isabel looked up at him. For us? Isabel, over these weeks, you've become very dear to me. Not just as an assistant, but as a woman. But I'm just your caregiver. I was here only because of the job. The job's over. The feelings remain if you share them. Isabel looked into his eyes, those brown eyes that had been hidden behind dark glasses for so long. They were full of warmth and sincerity. I don't know. So much has happened. I understand. Take your time. There's no rush. That night, Isabel couldn't sleep. Her life had changed completely. She no longer had any illusions about her uncle, nor any belief in the accidental death of her parents, nor her job as a caregiver. But she had something new, the possibility of real relationships with a man who had trusted her with his secret and his life. And she had hope for justice, and a future without lies and betrayal. 3 months passed after the arrest of Gustavo and Diego. Isabel still lived at Alejandro's house, but no longer as a caregiver. She wasn't exactly sure what to call her status. Alejandro had tactfully suggested she stay until she decided what to do next. The court proceedings were ongoing. Gustavo and Diego remained in custody. Their lawyers tried to lessen the sentences, but the evidence was overwhelming. Detective Maria Rodriguez became a frequent visitor to the Moreno house. She meticulously gathered details, and each visit brought new revelations. We found the person who ordered your parents' deaths, she told Isabel during one of her visits. Gustavo Ramirez really did orchestrate the car crash. The hitman has already testified in exchange for a lighter sentence. Isabel clenched her fists. It was painful to hear, but she had to know the truth. And the land? It's been returned to you by court order. Moreover, you are entitled to compensation for moral damages. It's a significant amount. I don't want money for my parents' deaths. I understand your feelings, Señorita Mendoza. But it's about restoring justice. Besides, your uncle must compensate for all the harm he caused. Alejandro, sitting next to her, took Isabel's hand. This money could help you start a new life. It's what your parents would have wanted. As for Diego, his crimes turned out to be even more extensive. The investigation revealed that he had been embezzling company funds for over a year, preparing documents to transfer management rights to himself, and even trying to bribe some hotel managers. He stole more than $8 million from the company, Alejandro said at dinner. He spent it on gambling and risky investments. The company was on the verge of bankruptcy in one of the branches. And all that time he was pretending to be a caring nephew? People will do anything for money, Isabel. Especially when it's about a big inheritance. The most shocking revelation was the connection between Gustavo and Diego. It turned out they had known each other much longer than it seemed. Your uncle had been Diego's business partner for 2 years, the detective said during another meeting. Together, they were buying up land plots, planning a major construction project. Your parents' deaths were part of that plan, and the attack on Senor Moreno was the logical next step. So all this time they were preparing the conspiracy? Exactly. Diego was to gain control over the hotel business, and Gustavo would launch the construction project on the combined lands. The profits would have been enormous. Isabel shook her head. And they wanted to use me as a tool. And a potential victim. After your uncle's death, you would have known too much. The sentences were severe. Gustavo was sentenced to life in prison for orchestrating double murder and attempted murder. Diego received 25 years for fraud, embezzlement, and being an accomplice in the attempted murder. On the day the verdict was announced, Isabel and Alejandro were present in the courtroom. Gustavo didn't even glance at his niece as he was led away. Diego shot his uncle a hateful glare. Justice has prevailed, Alejandro said as they left the courthouse. Yes, but it won't bring back my parents. No. But now they can rest in peace. That evening, they talked openly about the future for the first time. Isabel, I know the past few months have been very hard on you. And I don't want to pressure you. But I need to know, what do you plan to do next? They sat in the living room by the fireplace, just like on that first evening months ago. But now there were no secrets between them. I've been thinking about it. A lot. And what conclusion have you reached? Isabel stood and walked to the window. In the garden, spring flowers were blooming, and everything around was awakening to new life. I want to finish my medical education. Get my degree. That's a wonderful idea. And after that? After that, I'd like to work with people. Maybe open a medical center for those who have gone through serious trauma, both physical and psychological. Alejandro nodded. A noble goal. And is there room in those plans for a personal life? Isabel turned to him. Alejandro, you saved my life. You helped me find the truth about my parents. I'm very grateful to you. But I don't want our relationship to be built on gratitude. That's not a foundation for love. And what should it be built on? Isabel came over and sat next to him. On trust. On mutual respect. On the fact that we went through hardships together and stayed true to ourselves. Alejandro took her hand. Isabel, I didn't fall in love with you out of pity or gratitude for your help. I fell in love with you for your honesty, for your strength of spirit. For the way you trusted me with your life, even knowing the truth about who I am. And what are you proposing? To be my wife. To share not just a house with me, but a life. Isabel was silent for a long time, then smiled. And what about my studies, my plans? All of that can be combined. I'll help you with your studies. And we'll open the medical center together, I as the investor, you as the doctor and the heart of the project. Is that a serious proposal? The most serious one of my life. Isabel looked into his eyes. In them, she saw the sincerity she had learned to trust over the past months. Yes, she said quietly. I agree. The wedding took place 6 months later, once the court process was fully concluded. It was a small ceremony with only their closest friends. Isabel didn't want a grand celebration so soon after everything they had endured. Esteban, the old butler who had become like family to her, walked her down the aisle. Your parents would have been so proud, he whispered, placing her hand in Alejandro's. Detective Maria Rodriguez, who had become a close family friend over the course of the investigation, stood as a witness. After the ceremony, the newlyweds went on their honeymoon to Italy. Alejandro showed Isabel his hotels, talked about his plans for business expansion. But the most important thing was that they talked about the future, building plans for their life together. You know what I realized these past months? Alejandro said one evening as they sat on the terrace of a hotel overlooking the sea. True blindness doesn't come from damaged eyes but from a damaged heart. Greed, envy, betrayal, they blind a person more than any disease. And what brings true vision? Love, trust, honesty with oneself and with others. Isabel took his hand. Then we both have found our sight. A year later, they opened the medical center New Life. By then, Isabel had earned her degree and specialized in rehabilitation for trauma survivors. Alejandro provided the funding and managed the operations. The center quickly gained a strong reputation. People came from all over the country, those who had survived accidents, illnesses, psychological trauma. Isabel worked with each patient personally, investing not only her professional knowledge but her heart. "You know what it's like to lose everything and start again," she would tell her patients. "And I know it's possible to find happiness after tragedy." Alejandro changed too. He no longer pretended, no longer wore a mask. His business prospered, but now he dedicated much of his energy to charity and helping people in difficult situations. 2 years later, they had a daughter. They named her Anna, after Isabel's mother. "Now we have everything," Isabel said, holding their tiny daughter in her arms. "Everything that truly matters," Alejandro agreed. Family, love, honesty with each other, life had taught them to cherish the simple joys, to treasure each day, and not to take happiness for granted. Gustavo and Diego served their sentences in different prisons. Sometimes, Isabel received letters from her uncle, begging for forgiveness, asking to see her, but she never replied. Some betrayals are beyond forgiveness. The plot of land for which Isabel's parents had died was turned into a memorial park. Where a shopping mall had once been planned, trees now grew, and a bench stood with a plaque, in memory of Miguel and Ana Mendoza. Isabel often brought her daughter there, telling her stories about the grandparents she would never meet. "They were good people," she would say. "And they would want us to be happy." And happiness truly did come into their home. Not the shallow, showy kind that money can buy, but real happiness, hard-earned, deserved, based on truth and love. Alejandro never wore dark glasses again. His eyes remained open, to the world, to his family, to the people who needed help. And Isabel never forgot the lesson life had taught her. True blindness is the inability to see the good in people, and true sight is the ability to find light even in the darkest of circumstances. Their story became a legend among the staff of the New Life Medical Center and Alejandro's hotels, a story about how love and truth always triumph over lies and betrayal. About how sometimes you have to lose everything to find true happiness. And every evening, as Isabel and Alejandro tucked their daughter into bed, they would look at each other and understand their journey had been difficult, painful, full of loss. But it had brought them exactly where they were meant to be, to each other. In a world full of deceit and treachery, they had found an island of honesty and love. And that was their greatest victory.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.